And joining us again here in the studio is Nabila Ramdani, a journalist who specialises in French and Arab affairs. But before we start analysing the mood, not just in Nice, but across France, terrible grief at the scale of this tragedy.
Well, yes, absolutely. And this is clearly the worst possible news for France, a country which is still trying to come to terms with devastating terror attacks that were perpetrated in Paris last year. Almost 150 people were killed in Paris, and the death toll in Nice kept rising overnight. So this is still very much a country reeling from devastating attacks, 3 major terrorist attacks over 18 months. And there's this state of living under a permanent state of emergency is very high on the minds of the French people. And once again, it's the most vulnerable targets possible that were hit.
The softest target possible, this celebration.
Yes, indeed. Innocent men, women, and indeed many children who were out and about to enjoy the biggest national day in France.
I was just momentarily thinking we might be hearing from the President, Nabila, but we're just having a problem in lining up the shot of President Hollande, and indeed hearing his comments. He, as you'll be aware, has been visiting some of those injured in Nice. If we do interrupt you, that'll be why. But this idea of the soft targets, of people in the back of their minds having to think, wherever I go and whatever I do on an ordinary day, there is this horrible dark thought that something might go wrong.
Yes, these were people who were enjoying what was meant to be a day of parties, people sitting in bars, enjoying a meal in restaurants, or simply watching fireworks and walking around with members of their family. Just the same kind of situation that we've seen in Paris last year, with people going to a football match or indeed enjoying a concert in the center of the city. And I think one thing that has been made horrifically clear by this barbarism is that there are so many improvised weapons and indeed primitive weapons, including vehicles, that can be used to kill people. And yes, we hear about cars or lorries with explosive targeting strategic targets in countries such as Syria, for example. But once again, in Nice, what was made clear is that holidaymakers and local people were, to be the victims of the perpetrators.
And closing borders doesn't necessarily help, just as you couldn't predict a weapon being used here because it was a truck. Closing the borders to keep out terror is not an effective response.
I think it has to be a comprehensive response from the French authorities, and this has been very high on the minds of all involved. François Hollande was, like many other French people, enjoying a day off yesterday, but then we saw the familiar scene of him meeting up with security and intelligence chiefs, discussing what happened and how that was allowed to happen yet again. And of course, this case is now treated as a terrorism case. You have counter-terrorism judges, a position that doesn't exist in the UK, looking at the case, investigating, all the aspects, but also looking at how to prevent such attacks in the future. And there has been an awful lot of criticism aimed at the government for failing to prevent attacks in the past and the Nice attacks. For example, there has been a very damning parliamentary report that has been investigating the Paris attacks last year and has concluded that there were global failings in the response by the intelligence and indeed security services. This will have to be taken into account. There has been, for example, a particularly slow response by the security forces when the Bataclan theatre was attacked. There are questions about why known criminals were allowed to move freely in the Middle East and indeed across Europe, and why they were able to have access to guns with so much ease. So these are the questions that security forces and indeed the government will have to address, because they are of great concern not only to the French but also to all the foreign nationals who love France and would love to go back and visit, but would like to feel safe and secure while doing so.
We'll talk more in a moment. I'm just looking at a line from Reuters that Interpol are saying that they have deployed an incident response team to Nice, as you would perhaps expect, and one other line on it, that the team includes experts in disaster victim identification and also terrorism information specialists. So Reuters, they're reporting that Interpol are going to get involved in investigating the events that we've been discussing. But it goes back to the point, Nabila, that you were making a moment ago, that these kinds of bodies go in after the event. The concerns in France will be about preventing them happening in the first place.
Yes, indeed, and it has to be said that there have been several warnings in France, especially with the country being the host of the Euro 2016 football
And of course,
games.
we don't know about other events that may have been prevented by intelligence and security
yes, indeed.
work.
We do know of events who were prevented. For example, weeks before the Euro 2016, a far-right sympathiser was arrested in the Ukraine, a French national, with a truckload of weapons. He carried 125 kilos of explosives, 3 rocket-propelled grenades, and indeed a vast arsenal of rifle guns. And it has to be said, thanks to the Ukrainian intelligence services and security services, that he was able to be arrested there and prevented from striking what he said he said he would carry out attacks against mosques, synagogues, and indeed the Euro 2016 games. So it was, very lucky.
But Nabila, this individual, it's clear, has his roots in Tunisia. Reuters has reported that he came from a Tunisian town where the authorities didn't see him as having any radical links. And he's being named, at least on French media, as Mohamed Boukhlil, due to, I think, the identity papers that were found in the truck.
Yes, I think, what we can assert is that the profiles of the perpetrators behind the attacks in Nice, or indeed in Paris last year, are depressingly familiar and, dare I say, predictable. They come from the same kind of background, French of North African background, mixed backgrounds, always involved in criminality. Armed robberies, often drug dealings, often known to the intelligence.
They look like petty criminals.
They look like petty criminals, but in fact they are interacting with a vast network of like-minded criminals across Europe. They have access to weapons from the Balkans, for example, from former Soviet Union states, and are able to carry them through borders unnoticed, for example. This suggests, a network of criminals working hand in hand to strike in the most devastating manner. And of course, the suspect in the Nice attacks, although he was not on a terror watch list, he was known to the police for carrying weapons. Now, of course, the attack is being investigated. For example, the investigating judges will be looking at how he was able to hire the lorry, for example. Did he pay for it himself? Did somebody else pay for it himself? If so, were these people, or was that person based in France? Were they based abroad? These are the kind of questions that should have been asked before.
Looking for a wider network.
Yeah.
Nabila Ramdani, thank you so much for joining us.